Caltrain sound wall is around 17 million, and then the Caltrain cross streets under the Caltrain is a total of 216 million, because each intersection is an estimated of about 27 million. So that brings us to our grand total of 270 million, but we decided to divide our numbers up into these categories, because it's very important to note, if you could click to the next, that, and one more, that these two components, the sound wall and the cross streets under the Caltrain, are likely implementations with the high-speed rail, and that's due to the fact that with a lot of the noise and the vibrations, there's likely going to be a sound wall that's built anyways. And then in addition, due to the fact that the trains are moving and there's more of them at a greater frequency, this causes traffic to start and stop a lot. So there are already current proposals looking to having the cross streets move under the Caltrain in order to help promote the flow of traffic. Thus, the incremental cost of having a bike path along the Caltrain is around 37 million, and that makes a little bit more sense relative to the 14 million, as opposed to just comparing the 14 million to the 270 million.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And so we put these numbers on our visual matrix. And so we wanted to then evaluate everything. How do our two proposals increase bike mode share, commuter bike mode share, and how do they do on cost? And so ultimately, as we can see by the amount of negatives for both, they're both expensive, yes, but as Sarah was explaining, El Camino is much more inexpensive. And so taking that into the overall ranking of our two proposals, we would put forward El Camino as our best proposal because it increases bike mode share most effectively, and it is the least expensive of the two. And so what we did with our clients on our presentation on Wednesday was that we gave them individualized recommendations for if their city prioritized one of these properties over the other, what would be best for them to implement. So first, if our client prioritized directness, we definitely recommended El Camino. And then for the perception of safety, it was that if that was the most important thing to them, Caltrain was where they needed to go. And similarly with proximity to trip attractors and advances in overall bike network, El Camino was an awesome bet. And then as we explained in the slide before, El Camino advances overall commuter bike mode share the most. And then in terms of cost effectiveness, we wanted to throw it back to the base case because that is the least expensive of the three. And if that is the overall priority of these cities, staying with a base case would save them the most money.
Thank you, Matthew. So in addition to our conclusions, we also wish to highlight the limitations of our research, and we recommend potential modes of addressing these limitations moving forward. The first major limitation is equity. So the development of our bikeway proposals took for granted mostly that the creation of these new proposals, these new bikeways, would result in equitable outcomes in the Mid-Peninsula period. And since, aside from walking, biking is the lowest cost mode of transportation over an extended period of time, and for some the bike may be the only affordable mode of transit, it is imperative to ensure that there's an equitable allocation of bike facilities, that is, higher need areas have easier access to the facilities. A true commitment to equity requires an examination of how the creation of new infrastructure at all can lead to gentrification, and Silicon Valley Bike Coalition reminds us to think about the fact that even the most well-intentioned projects can potentially lead to unanticipated displacement or gentrification. So in order to prevent these unintended consequences, it's imperative to include community members in the entire policy process to evaluate their needs adequately and do what they need for their community and their mobility. So we recommend the creation of an equity index in order to address this limitation. For example, the Los Angeles Department of Transportation maintains their explicit commitment to equity by utilizing an equity index when planning any new street designs. So their index includes items such as access to resources, income level, previous attention and funding, which is key, and also health variables such as childhood obesity and rates of respiratory disease. So the Managers Mobility Partnership, we know, does a good job in consulting with community members at the early planning phases of their bikeway projects. And we recommend that during these planning phases, they create an equity index that's relevant to the community needs of the MMP.
Another limitation of our report was our sole focus on the Central Corridor. Stefan Heck, an urban mobility specialist in the Bay Area, mentioned to our group that people interested in cycling as a mode of transportation and a method of commuting are looking for convenience, meaning they're not willing to go significantly out of their way to get on a bike lane. For that reason, Mr. Heck recommended 3 bike route options in the area, one in the east, one in the west, and the central location. So while our report focused on the central route, east and west options would also be explored in order to create the greatest amount of commuter connectivity.
Great, and finally, there's needs to be feasibilities that needs to be done in terms of political, physical, and economic feasibility studies. So some of these would include having input from the community in terms of whether they would like the bike path or not, and whether they would be accepting of that, as well as like traffic reports and traffic studies, and we have to take into account that it's better for the environment and all the other considerations. So more of these feasibility studies are outlined in our report.
And as Mark mentioned, we're going to be taking all this information and we're in the final editing stages of producing our Practicum report that we're going to deliver to our client for their future reference and also for the Public Policies Department's reading pleasure. So at this time we have many individuals that we want to thank. First and foremost, Professor Litvak was incredibly dedicated throughout the entire process. And we had a shared Google Doc that we all worked on. And so one feature, as you can see, when your teammates and professor are on the doc, and he was constantly there adding feedback, comments. We all worked in the quad until like 11-ish the other night, getting some fine-tuned details. So passionate, so dedicated, just an amazing mentor, and we truly appreciated his guidance throughout the whole journey. We also want to make sure to thank our amazing public policy department. I've been a TA for Greg's intro seminar this quarter, and as he was leaving the other night in his bike gear and neon, he offered to have a picture for our slideshow. But the whole department has been amazing and
Notice the
so
helmet.
helpful. I know, the helmet. Great. As I tell the freshmen, it's my favorite major, and we hope to recruit many more members. And there are also some additional acknowledgments we want to make to the members of the MMP. And Russell Hancock is head of Joint Venture Silicon Valley, that consulting firm that was part of the organizational process. And these are a number of other individuals that helped to answer our questions and guide us with research throughout our entire journey. So at this time, we'd be happy to take any questions you may have, and thanks so much for listening.
Yes.
I was interested in the use of the term perception of safety. And I wondered the extent to which the perceived safety actually correlates well with actual safety. I mean, you can imagine that something that seems safer encourages people to ride more recklessly or faster. So I guess the first question is, to what extent is the perception of safety and the actuality of safety, how well do they accord? And you gave us 5 alternative ways to mark bike paths. What's the actual experience of accidents, fatalities, or really dangerous accidents at each of those 5 options? To what extent do we have information that would instruct us as to which of the things protect the cyclist more?
2 great questions. So I'll answer the first one. Okay, the answer to both, we don't have the exact numbers. We have some general theories of papers that we've read. So the first, which is how does the perception of safety actually correlate with the actual causality? So you're right. Perception of safety is how safe someone thinks it's going to be, and yes, it does allow them to ride more recklessly at some points, but also it gets those that are a little bit weird to get out on the street, and some of the studies that we've read talk about when accidents happen, and a lot of the times they don't talk about them happening that frequently. Now there are some horror stories, but I'm not going to be able to cite any exact percentages for you, but the perception of safety does not 100% correlate with the actual safety of the road. It's more what the rider has envisioned in this route. And the second one, which was what is the actual safety in terms of each of the routes. So there's some really great studies of how both domestic and international cities have added in specific bike lanes. And they cite which lanes they have added, and how that has increased bike mode share. So we have it in that realm, and primarily it's more the protected bike routes that increase bike mode share. And remember, perception of safety was increased
That
bike
gets
mode share.
people on bikes, but let's ask the second question somewhat differently. Is there any preference amongst the 5 options, whether it's signage, it's green paint on the road, whatever it is, in terms of information that suggests that one or other of these is safer for cyclists?
Yes, and when you take a rider off the road where they don't encounter cars, that is the safest. So
Class 1 bikeway.
yeah, class 1.
And as well as you saw in the picture, perceived safety, it does not correlate to actual safety because the bike box, which was green that the car was in, that's supposed to be like a safe haven for bikers, and the car clearly didn't recognize that or understand.
And then another major yet minor component is something as simple as helmet use. Where in California, if you're in high school, you're required to wear a helmet. So a lot of the high schoolers going to their schools are indeed wearing helmets, but a lot of accidents can be avoided with something as simple as a helmet. I love wearing mine around campus. I'm one of the far and few, but maybe from a policy perspective, we can increase the actual safety by requiring those above 18 to wear a helmet, but that might be a little hard to convince.
And my wife would brace you for that. There's the horrors of driving around Stanford campus in the dust and seeing all these students who think of themselves as immortal, riding in the dark with no lights, no helmets, no nothing.
So behavioral changes are a component.
I had a couple questions. So one was about how you were given the project, and so they had this base case. Were they thinking that like were some of the cities on board and not on board, and so they wanted to see other alternatives? Like, how were you told to approach that base case? I'm just curious about the background and how the base case fits in.
Yeah, so all of the managers that we mentioned from Redwood City, Mountain View, Carlisle to Stanford and Menlo Park all came together because they wanted to agree to this partnership for cross-regional collaboration. So they were all on board. And it was our research, the project, in the process of looking at existing conditions that we asked, is there an existing north-south central bikeway solution that we should examine and seek to improve or create something new? And at our initial client meeting, they also emphasized wanting us to envision an ideal bikeway network. So, you know, what could be even better than what they have already planned, have already designated, and might be in the process of publicizing what can be better, what is the best way to increase bike mode share to some of the levels like we see in Amsterdam. So it was really free range, actually.
And also the base case isn't well publicized right now, and it hasn't been really solidified, and so that's just kind of up in the air right now, and so they didn't really emphasize us looking at that base case, but more of just like a cross-regional way to increase bike mode share.
Okay. And then the other question is about how you picked which criteria you used. So you went with many bike-related ones and then the cost. And I guess I have one thing to say about one of your bike ones about directness. So El Camino is direct, you know, it is straight, it doesn't have all those turns, and yet driving on El Camino, it's very slow. There's a lot of stops with the all the stoplights and so on, whereas I think having driven on some of these, which perhaps the base case one where it's residential streets, you know, there tend to be fewer stoplights where you actually, you know, maybe there's stops, but you don't have to stop at as long. So it's just one thing to think about with the trade-off between directness and how long things take. And then, at the end, and I think it was really good that you mentioned that there needs to be these feasibility studies, but that's where some other criteria could have come up, right? As far as like, how is it gonna affect motorists, the motorists, and also like the parking, if you take away a whole thing of parking, or if you take away a whole lane for the motorists. Did your client want you just to focus on the biking, and they're gonna deal with that later? Because
yeah, so during our midterm check-in at week 5, we asked that question because it seemed like, hey, if we're taking away parking lanes, isn't that going to be a big issue? But their perspective was they really wanted us to be fresh eyes and think about innovative solutions and not worry about the political feasibility. So they strictly told us, put it on the back burner, it's something that we can figure out down the line, but just like bring us innovative solution ideas. So that is a key component of policymaking, but at the wisdom of our client, we decided to look into other criteria.
And then to your directness point, you're very right. And each of the three routes has their own good quality of directness. And so that's why we had three different definitions, three parts of it. And so our ranking system was trying to gather a sum total of how it did on all three of those. And so yes, you're right, El Camino has a lot of stop signs. But then we saw the base cases being very complex and convoluted and complicated. So the way we saw it, El Camino was a little bit more direct with those, among those three categories.
First of all, Stefan did have some data he presented to the city managers that El Camino is by far the most dangerous route, and the intersection of El Camino and Embarcadero is the most dangerous of all the intersections. So I think you can get real-time data about traffic, and it probably would be a good study. But I was want to follow up on Mary's question, which is, am I to understand that in order to allow the bikes to turn left, you would have more stop signs that are currently on El Camino?
Different signal phases, so not stop signs, but different stoplights, yes.
So that would be adding to the number of stop signs.
Absolutely,
So
and
you'll have even grumpier Marys than that.
Yeah, I go to El Camino almost every day.
So everybody that has to drive their kid to school, you'll learn.
That was, my question was gonna be, did you take the opportunity cost of the time for the drivers into account and parking? Sort of
Right.
similar.
And the time for the
Yeah.
bikers, yeah.
Well, they were told not to worry about that. And it could be partly that Stefan has also sold the city managers on the idea that someday there will be self-driving vans.
So you don't
that will
need
go
that.
down the
You
street.
don't
You
need
don't
that.
have to worry about drivers.
But looking at the Caltrain route, we could avoid that issue, especially if there are grade changes with the high-speed rail, where cars and bicyclists would then just travel under and not have to worry about stopping, similar to the underpass we have just in front of Stanford heading into University. But then from like the cost evaluation component, those might be changes that happen with the Caltrain implementation upgrade anyways. And so it would be nice to latch on to that initiative with bike paths. But then if those grade changes don't happen, then we know the cost, and the solution in that case would be to have an intersection where you just stop at grade, like at ground level, and that would be similar to the one on Churchill Street where you cross the Embarcadero bike path.
No, it was kind of shocking, the difference in the cost, and so tell me why the Caltrain one is so much more expensive in sort of an intuitive sense here?
Yeah, so well, when you get the luxury of a class 1 bike path that's completely separate and safe, you're almost in a sense building a whole nother road. So as I mentioned briefly, but there's a lot of numbers, it's $775,000 a mile for this class 1 bike path. That is basically a road, but then for the class 4 protected, you're basically on the side of a road and you have some concrete as a separation to give the bicyclist some safety. But then that's not a major infrastructure change, so it's around $200,000 a mile. So since we've got about, 11 miles, it slowly adds up. And then for connectivity at the end of our route, we have a recommended $3 million overpass that would connect our route to the Stevens Creek Trail. That's a little bit higher. And so then that's $3 million, but then it's great because then it addresses, it allows the biker to then be in a whole nother network that's an existing bike network. So there are lots of little components, it adds up over time, but the good news is that there are some measures in the way, like Measure B, we just know a little bit about it, but there are some possibilities in the future to get funding for initiatives, and I believe that proposal is around $300 million. So there is money, it's just a question of allocation of resources.
So, I know for me, riding along Bryant Street was so much more pleasant than riding along El Camino. Even if you had me in the middle with lots of cars going by, and it feels a lot safer even if I were in a separated bike lane. It's just, as a bicyclist. And I was thinking, is there some way to combine some of the pieces where you had some of it go along like Bryant Street and some of the other things? And the other is turns. I counted in my mind, I make 7 turns to get here, just from Menlo Park. So it's not that many turns, and if you do it every day, it's not that hard to remember where to turn. And if it's signage, it may be easier to do that, I don't know, just if it's a lot less cost, the number of turns doesn't seem to be a huge thing, especially if people don't ride the whole way. If they're only going from Redwood City to Palo Alto, or Palo Alto to Mountain View. Did you guys think about combining pieces and making it, trying to optimize the actual routes as opposed to having something separate?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of resistance in this process toward having a route on El Camino Real because of the high traffic and all of the danger there. So even though El Camino Real is maybe ideal for an ideal vision for directness, just a straight shot and access to all of the commercial, residence, employment hubs along there, there are opportunities to shift the route from El Camino in certain places to accommodate other paths that maybe have a more increased perception of safety for cyclists, such as the Bryan Street, but also in Palo Alto we have the option of shifting to Alma Street for part of it, and in Redwood City there's the option of shifting over to Middlefield for part of it, since in Redwood City, El Camino Real and Middlefield are closer together than they are further south in the peninsula.
And the Caltrain route itself is very much a hybrid, where in the first component there's not enough room, so we looked and thought maybe El Camino, but there are other routes to explore. And then a little bit further down, we recommend having a path on Alma Street because there just wasn't space next to the Caltrain. So it would be possible to have various components where there is a lot of space to be right next to the Caltrain and be close for individuals that want to hop on and go various places. But looking down the line, there is a lot of data we've gathered on specific components, and we could ultimately compile them into a larger plan. Lynn?
Hi there. First off, great presentation. It's going to be a hard act to follow in the winter. So thank you. To perhaps follow up a little bit on Professor Rossman's point. So there's a mix of people who are going to be using the bike path. Some who are familiar with it. And some people, like last time I went deep into Palo Alto, I tried to find like the base case, I couldn't find it, ended up booking down El Camino going, oh snap, oh snap, oh snap. So what do you have any information on sort of the breakdown of these users? What proportion do you think are probably going to be regular commuters, and what proportion are going to be people who use it less frequently and might be less familiar with the route?
Great, so on our mode share slide, the bike mode share slide, and one in the beginning, that all those numbers were bike commuting, but also some of the data that we found shows how close people live to their how long their commute is, so how close they live to their place of work, and so roughly those numbers were between 25 and 40% of the daily commuters, so lived within 20 minutes of their place of work. So we kind of just threw it out there saying, look, here's people who live relatively close to their place of work, and maybe we can entice those people to get out and ride.
Thank you.
Just a couple of follow-up comments on a couple of questions. One is about having extra stops for cars on El Camino. So in their paper, they have another alternative to deal with the left turn question, which does not involve bike signalization, and so would not slow down the traffic, which is called a double bike box. So if you don't want to have the, if you don't want to slow the cars down at all, and you're willing to slow, but you don't care about the bikes, then the bikes make a right turn, and there's and this is used in a number of cities, and there's a protected area that they turn into after they turn right, and then they wait there, and then they proceed, as if they had made a left turn in this direction. So there's that alternative. And then, the Palo Alto Bike Boulevard and Bryant is very nice, but it's only a third of the entire route that they put up there. So what comes before and what comes after is a lot different than the bike boulevard. So that's just something they had to factor in.
To Caleb's question, the bike boulevard, the base case route really isn't much more than this is the area and this is where you would bike along, but there isn't a whole lot of infrastructure there. So a simple way to get more data on our users and help cater this path to them would be to have something as simple as dispersing a map and getting use of the base case and spending some time analyzing that and getting feedback, and then using that as the impetus for a more costly option, but to not I probably wouldn't go to that step until I have a little bit more information about the specific users in the area, but as Matthew mentioned, the data we have is just for commuters, because that's what have currently been studies of interest.
Right, and also part of completing the base case would be adding better signage, and so you would know where the route is.
So let's say you were given the resources and you had the time and motivation to do a survey of residents in these 4 cities. What would you like to know about the implementation of these different plans or the design of these plans that you could get out of such a survey? Or do you feel like you know everything you need to know? Let's say you're in the position of a city manager and you're gonna make a proposal like this and you're gonna get reaction and feedback from your citizens. What would you ask?
I'm really interested in learning more of like what the folks do outside of commuting, because we know that they're going to schools and they're going to parks and food shopping, but is that all like car use? Like what other reasons might they be using bikes? And once we have data about the mode share outside of commuting, that could be very helpful to help cater a bike path to those users that make up a large portion of the demographics.
I also think the relative perception of safety, like if they see the Caltrain as being like 20 times as more safe as El Camino, and then the base case being maybe 10 times more, something like that would be really interesting. Just to figure out the exact ratio of perception of safety.
Would you ask any questions about people that drive cars and their perception of the bike? I mean, it's a kind of general equilibrium problem there, right? There's what the bike riders and how they see the world, and then there's the non-bike riders and how they see the world, right? Which is what Mary was getting at.
Absolutely. I was also talking to my grandma about this project, and she was super excited, and she was like, I have to let you know, as a person that is like in an elderly community, like she hates when there's bicyclists because they're zooming by and you're just trying to walk, so they're moms with strollers, like there are definitely a lot of other groups in addition to the cars that may not like the bicyclists there, so making sure that it's as comprehensive as possible as a survey, it would be great to get everyone's input.
Yeah, I think that's also the great part about the Caltrain route is that, you know, it has very minimum crossings with cars and stopping cars and that sort of thing.
I have another question like Bruce's. If you had one more quarter to work on this project, what would you do? Would you just do Bruce's survey or?
If he provided the money.
Yeah.
I would vote for creation of the equity index, and if we had the time and resources to do interviews with community residents, I would love to hear where they'd like to go that are outside of the employment hubs that we focus on with the great populations of like LinkedIn and Google. Where do these other employees work? Where do they need to get to? Where do these teenagers work? Where do they need to get to? As well as I would argue for an inclusion of East Palo Alto city managers in this mobility partnership to include them in the process and to ensure that we're not designing infrastructure that further isolates that community.
They were originally in the partnership and somehow
A lot of
dropped
them
out.
want to talk about getting them back in.
And I too would, I would do a study just like you Bruce were talking about, of where the collisions are on our 3 main routes. And we can track that over the course of 10 weeks. And that would give us solid data on, as we were talking about, the actual safety versus the perception of safety. So I'd like to get more concrete evidence on that.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I think that looking at traffic rates, and especially in the El Camino route, like what would the impact of like signalization be on traffic, and if that would encourage people to bike instead, you know, if they're just going down the street or if they're commuting. I think that would be really interesting and really telling as to how efficient the El Camino route would be.
And the final component I was thinking of is like, in a lot of our research, we found that Europe is so much more ahead in having really high mode share, and great infrastructure developments, magenta highways, like things that really encourage folks to use bicyclists. So it's by no means apples to oranges, but if there were university students studying this environmental planning or civil engineering at places with success stories, to have some sort of collaboration could be a really fun, like, cross-borders global work collaboration that would be very D-School-esque. I don't know if it would be feasible.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, some of you may have had 106A and B and all that and be more computer savvy than me, but it seems to me we do have GPS on phones and everybody that commutes has a phone. couldn't you write an app that would, send the data of where you commute on your bike, when you're on your bike, to some source, and then you could start to collect information on what are the most frequent bike paths in this four-state community or four-community area, and start to get real data about how people commute, when they commute, what are the most likely routes?
Definitely. I'm
Wouldn't that be
good friends
doable?
with the gentleman that started CS plus Social Good, and so their group is now an official Stanford class, and so they look to partner with local organizations to use computer science to solve actual challenges, and you work on case teams, and then by the end of the quarter pitch solutions to them. So it would be awesome. I don't know how much of a quick turnaround they could do to incorporate projects, but there are definitely a lot of amazing
Because we had
Stanford
good data on
resources.
where, on that. You could also then add in the car component too. to see
Because
how-
the target is not the people who are commuting on bikes now, but the people who would switch to commuting on bikes.
Sure.
So I see I need to take that into account.
And where that would be really
Well,
effective.
that would be probably more with the polling, because you could embed a survey, experimental survey, in which you look at the people, what it would take to get people who aren't taking it now to do it. But I think we need some real hard data on what's going on in terms of both traffic patterns and bicycle patterns to kind of have an idea. But not too many people on a daily basis go all the way from Redwood
Oh,
City down the mountain.
Yeah.
There may be a few people working at Google, et cetera, that do that. But for the most part, my guess is there's gonna be segments of that, and you wanna know what are the most frequent segments of that. And my guess is that if you're doing the last mile commute, except for the Stanford Research Park and maybe the campus, a lot of them are on the other side of El Camino, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me you learn a lot if you could actually have that data.
Yeah,
Basis
and
within it.
that's kind of, we considered that, and we decided the cross-regional route was the best, and then allowing the within their communities, the city planners, to figure out like the east and west to get people to and from, like their hotspots. But the client was really looking for us to get the cross-regional, aspect of the bikeway.
Yeah, and so where that app would be really effective is in those inner cities, where they're taking a lot shorter routes. And you could get the hotspots and really make them effective. And then one other thing that came to mind, if we had 10 more weeks. So there's a big case study of 3 Scandinavian countries and how they increased their bike mode share. And they have a big list of all the different things they did. And only a couple of them were due to bike infrastructure. So there's a lot of policy alternatives that you can do to make driving more expensive. For instance. And so yeah. So
Slow down El Camino a lot and Mary will start riding.
That's part of how they do it.
Yeah, so again, just looking at to increase bike mode share in other ways than just bike infrastructure. That would be another thing.
Yeah, and it's giving preference, it's a policy decision to give preference to the cyclist to really encourage and emphasize biking as a mode of commuting, cyclists taking precedence over the drivers, I'd say, in order to really increase the mode share.
So I think bottom line, it was an amazingly enriching learning experience for a first step, but down the line, there's a lot of possibilities for future study and analysis, so it's an exciting place to be.
Thank you.